So if you want to make your own homepage and you want to learn web and HTML, want to become more efficient using your own computer, this tutorial will teach you the basics of HTML and build a homepage to make you more efficient using your computer. If you have all your links right there as soon as you open up your browser, all the links that you use, it'll be a little bit more efficient. So this is going to be a bit of a long video because we're really talking in depth about HTML. It's going to be one of the main HTML videos I'm going to do. HTML does have a lot to it. So different types of pages, just to understand a bit. Now this is going to come into more, it's going to be more handy to know this when we get into more of the web development side, actually building a website. A bunch of web pages and a few other types of documents comprise up a website. So this is one key thing to know about building a website. And we're going to talk about some of the other technologies, and we'll put together some other websites on this channel at some point. But for right now, let's just take a look here. HTML pages, these are basic hypertext markup language. That's what HTML stands for. And that's what we're really going to focus on here, is how to build this. SHTML is secured HTML. Certain servers will process it a bit more if there's an SHTML extension on that. It will allow it to be routed through the security engine, while something that doesn't have anything sensitive on it might get a standard HTML extension. It just depends on the server configuration, depends on whether or not you're going to need whether or not it will actually process everything, or whether or not it will recognize the SHTML. Sometimes it'll process all HTML secured, but if you wanted to separate it, that's the common practice for that. XHTML, that's using XML as the basis to create your HTML document. It is a practice that is used for certain special applications, particularly when you want to make your document super well formed. That's really useful whenever you're using lower powered or smaller computers. Even these days, most of our phones, though, work just fine on standard HTML. That was more of an older thing, but it's still used a bit today. DHTML is a concept of making your HTML dynamic. That's later on, once we get into scripting, we'll learn how to do that. You can actually just about create the page with JavaScript if you want to, or whatever client-side language you want to, but this is really dealing with client-side scripting, heavily involved with the creation and manipulation of the HTML elements. And XML that's more of a data structure, and that's what we use as the basis of XHTML. And it just stands for Extensible Markup Language, and it's a type of data which we'll look into later on as well. But we're going to look into it briefly here just to understand its structure, because it's so similar to HTML. So it's good to talk about it here. So tag structure, this is the basis behind a document. They are based on a series of tags and attributes. The first one here is I call this the single sloppy. This is not going to work on XHTML. This is only going to work on your standard HTML to use just a standard tag, and that's where you only need a tag, and it's not really looking to encapsulate anything. No inner text to the tag. We'll get into more of that a little bit later on too. But that's single sloppy, and then single strict. This is if you're dealing with like XML or XHTML. You've always got to have every tag has to be closed, because XHTML is going to first look at it as an XML document, and then it will take that XML document and try and look at it as HTML. In this case here, we're also looking, this is a container, so inner text would be right in between the two tags. When I mentioned the inner text before, that's what I'm talking about. Now there's also attributes, and there's actually two different types of attributes on here as well. One of them, this one here, is a name value. So you've got the name, it's the attribute, and then the value would be in here. And there are some only for standard HTML. If you're dealing with XML, everything has to have the value, but with HTML, there are some things that they just have an existence of this attribute and it has no equals or value. And the quoting, if there's no space in that, only for standard HTML. You don't necessarily have to quote it if it's just a single number or something like that. It's a good practice to quote it. Single quotes or double quotes work because it's a good practice if you start getting into more finicky types of tagging. Then there you are. You'll have that practice of using the quotes. So the attribute, we discussed that, and then the element. And the attributes also need to be at the starting element. So, single sloppy, it would be right in here. Single strict, it would be right in here before the slash. If the slash is at the end, it's self-closing tag. If the slash is at the beginning, it's a closing tag for wherever it was created before. And no slash means it's either a single tag or it's an opening tag. And that ambiguity is the reason why XML, everything has to be strict. There can't be anything ambiguous. That's why they do that. All right, so element, we discussed the attribute. Now there's different types of document parts too. We're going to create on our document, and we'll get a chance to look at some sample documents later on, absolutely. But this is where we're going to see some examples on the next slides, really, dealing with the transitional, the strict, and the frame set types of document type definition. That should be the top line of an HTML document should be the doc type. It's informational. It tells your browser what it's looking at, what is it trying to do. That puts it more in a validated mode as opposed to being in quirks mode. If you don't enter that, then it's just presuming that it gets a little bit more flexibility, and in our application it's probably fine to not use a doc type. If it's just a local file, I do it all the time. I don't put doc types in there. If I'm doing a site for the web, I'm going to use a doc type, and my favorite to use is the transitional unless I'm doing a frame set. Frame set is the only one that allows the frame set elements. Frame sets are what they use to create a page that has like 2 panes, and you can change out one pane without the other pane. That's one of the ways that they'll do it, is with a frame set. Then we have the frame set that is the whole page, and it actually sets up where those different frames are, and then each frame is a different page within that. We'll look more into this when we deal with website construction. We won't deal as much with frame sets on this, but frame set is whenever you use it for the frame set doc type when you're dealing with a frame set page. But then other normal pages, you'll either use transitional or strict. If it's transitional, it supports pretty much everything except for frames. Everything, iframes are an exception. Iframes it will support. But frame sets and the frames within frame sets, it will not support. That you'll need to use a frame set. And then strict. Strict is good if you want to make sure that it's that your page is stricter, easier to read on more devices by chance. That's more of the smaller devices, the ones that are going to expect some strictness that will help with. But a lot of super efficient techniques cannot be done with strict, and that's the reason why I don't think I've really done a project that's outside of the experimental realm that I've used strict on. I almost always, for the web and for everything that I'm going to use a doc type on, I generally will use transitional or frame set. And we'll take a look at a little bit more of that too when we look into the different tag types. So this is just to kind of get your feet wet. You don't need to be memorizing everything I go across. This is just kind of getting your feet wet and getting your idea in mind for this, what I'm dealing with, and then later on I'll demonstrate more of this. So we're going to revisit almost everything on here. We have a head section, and then we have a body or frame set, depending on what we did up here. And if you don't enter if you don't enter a doc type and you're in Quirks mode, then it will try and figure out for itself, is it transitional or is it frame set. It'll support either one. So that's part of the reason why on my own computers, if I'm just building my own homepage like what I'm doing here, I wouldn't even use a doc type for this. But it's good to know about it. Alright, so head and then the body or the frame set. The head section is where everything that you don't really see directly on the page goes. And we'll discuss the tags for that following the next few slides. And then body, how that's formed, different tags that we can use in there. And we'll kind of demonstrate some of these tags too later on towards the end of the video. So transitional doc type, this is what we discussed before. Supports everything except for frames, the ultimate for creating a page. This is what it would look like. This would be your first line of text up on your page if you're using transitional doc type. If you're using Quirks mode, you won't have anything up there. Now, strict doc type. And this is how you would write the strict doc type definition. Exact string should be up at the very top, should be your top line. And this means that you're not going to have a lot more efficient, but I feel like the older ways of creating some of the pages are a bit more efficient and more recognized by more browsers. But this does not support those obsolete types. And yes, I am aware here that these are for HTML 4.01, and they did come out with an HTML5. But HTML5 is still not really all that well recognized by super old computers. HTML 4.01 is been recognized and probably will be for another, who knows how many years to come, probably a decade or more. Wouldn't surprise me at all if it's going to be around for a lot longer. I feel like that's the golden one to go with if you want the most people to be able to read this. So the frame set doc type is now here, and this deals with, frames, which we really won't be getting too deep into with this. We're not even really going to look at inline frames very much in this video at all, because this is just about building a single page. I think we will be building 2 pages, but this is just about the HTML itself and using that to our advantage. Now, head tags. There are 6 major tags that you're going to find up in head section. So after the doc type definition, you're going to have an HTML tag, and that will encompass everything else on that page. So you'll have an opening tag for HTML, and then you'll have a closing HTML tag. We'll actually look at that on the examples later on. And then within that, you'll have a head tag, opening and closing, and inside that are all of the tags on this slide. Any of those that you're going to use can go in there. And then below that head tag, after you close out that head tag, you're going to type in a body tag, and then down below that body tag you will have a closing body tag, and then everything for the body tags that we're going to discuss will be in there. So inside that head tag, and you'll actually be able to see a demo of what I'm talking about later on, so you don't need to memorize all of it, just getting your feet wet. Title, okay, the page title, and that will be displayed, usually it's displayed up in the browser caption, or if a search engine is looking at this, it's considering it for the title of the search listing as well. Now, metas come in 2 different forms. You have content equivalents, and named values. Now, content equivs are more for like system use, for the browser to actually trigger something like a meta refresh. You can put a meta tag in there that will cause the page to refresh after a certain number of seconds to reload from its source. Named values are more for storing information for the search engines or for things like that, but that's just for user data that would be read by a search engine or something of that nature is named values. BG sound is for background sound. In this case here, it is going to be BG sound, and then SRC is an attribute which tells the source of the sound file, and then you can also have a loop attribute, and a -1 on that will mean it's infinite looping. Any other number in there, it's going to mean it's going to loop that many times. So you can play a background sound and replay it and replay it and replay it, or only play it a certain number of times. And it can create background sound or background music for your website. That tag is very helpful for that. Now, link, style, and script. These guys we're going to discuss in other videos because they deal with CSS and scripting. But the link, you're going to have it's going to be a relevance, i.e. REL attribute. Well, there's many different types of links too. It's not just for CSS, but that's been the main use for them. You can also put in fav icons and a bunch of other stuff in there. But if you're going to use it for CSS, it's going to be REL. The REL tag is going to be set to style sheet, and then it's going to have a type of, that's going to be the MIME type. HTML is text/HTML. Plain text is text/plain. Text/CSS is for CSS in that case. And there's a whole bunch of them. You can send images, and it's a way of telling what data is. What is the data they should be expecting on that link? Web servers will send that to the browser to tell them, what are you downloading? Are you downloading an HTML page? Are you downloading plain text? Are you downloading an image? So it will tell the browser that by that content type, MIME type tag, or MIME type string. And it's usually the type, those that are made up of the type of the bigger group of data, such as text or audio or image, and then a slash, and then the kind of the subtype. Is it plain text? Is it CSS? Is it HTML? What type specifically now are we dealing with? So yeah, links. Links they allow you to get an external CSS style sheet, and style and script. Well, script allows you to do external and internal script to insert browser-side, client-side scripts. And style tag is for inline CSS. So script is for inline or external scripting. But then CSS is link for external, style for internal. So let's take a look at some of the body tags now that they have. You've actually got headers H1 through H6. These tags, and many body tags, especially body tags, many tags, but especially body tags, have a number of different attributes that are common among all the tags. An ID is one of those attributes. An ID must be unique to the document regardless of the tag type, of the element type. So if you have an H1 that is set to an ID of 2, it could be a string. A lot of times they're used as strings. So it'd be like text. First header, let's say, or second header. We said it was an H2, right? So it's H2 ID second header. You cannot have anything else in there with that ID of second header. Your next H2 down cannot be called second header. How the browser will react on that, it depends on the browser. IDs though, names is another attribute, and that can be duplicated. But that's another way to identify something. ID identifies something for later use. Name can identify something for later use, and that we'll get into more with the scripting, with the client-side scripting. We're going to get more into that. There's also class, which defines a CSS class for something to be in, and style attribute will define CSS styles for things, and that we'll get more into with the CSS side once we do those videos. But these are designed to be, the H1 is the upper level. So if you're talking about, let's say you've got a page with a bunch of sections. You're going to have, your page is about cars, let's say. So your H1, your top header, its inner text will be cars. Then you might have subsections underneath that, so you might want to split those off. So that's your next level down, so you're going to move down to H2, and you can't go beyond H6. They're built in H1 through H6. But when you deal with these headers, going down to your next level. Now maybe you're dealing with muscle cars and race cars, let's say. You're going to have a section on muscle cars, you're going to have a section of race cars underneath that. So you'll have your header 2 muscle cars, and then you'll have whatever text there is, whatever information about that. And then you'll have H2 again, because that's another section that's still under the H1. Ooh. And then you'll talk about race cars. It'll be set up that way. Now many of these text containers, a lot of these guys also have align attributes, which allows you to align your text either left, right, center, or justified, which is similar to left, but whenever it reaches the end of the line and automatically wraps down to the next line, it's going to try and justify its space by stretching that text out across the screen, across the width of the usable area. P is for a paragraph. So if you're going to create text and enforce it to be on one group, it's going to have a line drop after that. P also contains padding. Just remember P for padding. A div is similar to a P, stands for division. It doesn't really contain its own padding. Now span would actually really be more for formatting, because it's designed for CSS to reference that span of text and format it. But it's also oftentimes used with the other top 2. But it does not enforce a line drop on either side. It's not really a block element. And we'll get a better look at this stuff too later on. Once we get building our page, we will get a chance to look at all of this. Here we have things to format our text. Okay, we can change the font, but we can also bold it, italicize it, underline it, strike it through, do a subscript or superscript. So if you're going to create any of this, you're just going to encapsulate whatever you're turning bold with an opening tag of B and then a closing tag after that with the /B, closing tag for B. So it will be enclosed in that tag, in that B tag. Same thing with striking through, italicizing, any of that stuff. This is one of the things that I don't like about strict, is you cannot use these tags. All of these tags on this line are obsolete. You have to use span and you have to use CSS information and hope the browser supports CSS. My rule is make sure it looks good without CSS and script, because you never know what's going to take to CSS and what's not. Most systems take CSS, but some are iffy on it. Sometimes it will fail to load, sometimes, and you just don't really want it to look so terrible without it. So I like to make sure that my HTML looks good even without that, and hey, CSS is going to make it look a whole lot better. And we'll see that when we get done with our project at the end of this video and we go on to the CSS video. You'll see where I'm talking about with that. So, A is for a link or an anchor. Now these have two special attributes on them, on these A tags. Actually, they have three that I think are kind of important here. So, well, one of them is the name. It's the same as I said before. All these tags have names. You can assign a name and an ID and a class and a style to anything. However, assigning a name to an A tag means that you can link to it as an anchor. And that's something which we'll look more into when we deal with website construction, that you can link to it. But basically, if you link into it with a hash after the URL, it's going to make sure that this is visible and usually towards the top of the page, that whatever is in, this is another one that is going to include some of your other text, like perhaps one of your headers. I would put this, I'd have my header tag, I'd open that, and I'd open an anchor tag and name that, and then have whatever my text is in there, or maybe even have the anchor first and then the header. Either way I think would work fine. And then that A name and whatever I'm going to name it, and then my text, and then close my header, close my anchor. Now if you're dealing with XML or XHTML, you need to close things in the opposite order of what you open them. So if you were dealing with this situation where you had, you know, header 1 and then you opened your anchor, you would have to close the anchor first, then close the header. And if you did the anchor on the outside here, it would have to be on the outside of the other close. So this allows you to create something that you can link to by naming it. Otherwise, we have the other attribute for this is a href, which is where it's going to link to, and there's a number of things that we can do on that. I will discuss this more when we do our demo about those other link tos that we can do, and especially when we get into website building, we're going to get into that. Also, it can have a target. A target is which frame or even into a new window that it would open. So it would be a name of a frame, and then if you, there's also a number of special targets that you can give to it as well. Underscore blank will open it in a new tab. Underscore top will enforce that it's at the top level frame within the current window. And we'll get into more of that when we deal with frames, yes. And then underscore tab is iffy how that works, because it depends on the browser, and some of them are some of those browsers out there, they don't do the tabs as well. So if you use underscore tab, it's questionable. But if you use underscore blank, if it's a tab supported browser, it will usually open it up in a new tab. Now another one here is the HR horizontal rule. That's just to draw a line across the whole screen, one horizontal line to make a divider. So maybe at the end of a section or halfway through a section you want to divide that. That's one good way to do it. You just use an HR tag and you've got that. Another thing too is a BR tag, which means break row. You can use a BR tag to force a line break inside of any text. at least most text. There are some exceptions to that. Things here that are set by a value attribute, which we'll see that in forms. So there's also tables that you can create. So if it's not good enough here to just create things as paragraphs, we can go ahead and structure them into rows of cells. So tables, it creates the table. And then you can also set some other tags on there too, such as the border color, and that would be a color tag. And we can set the border color. We can set the border, which is the width of the border for the table and the cells, and well, particularly the table itself. The cells are oftentimes set individually, and then any of the cell spacing and cell padding can also be put in there as far as how much space you want inside of the cells or spacing the cells apart. And there's a whole bunch of tags for things that you'll see. There's a whole bunch of attributes that you can add. Caption, it also supports that align attribute. Now, TRs, they don't really have too much to worry about in the way of attributes. That sets up a row, and we're going to see it as a sample table. Table header is typically more bolded text, and it's designed to be used for header information in that. Not like the head section is of the document. It is more for like a label for a column or a label for a row. Anything which is really a label on there should be a TH. And then there's also TD, which is table data, which is more normal cell. And these guys can have aligns, and they have the same concept of left, right, center. They've also got V-align, which is for vertical alignment, which can be top, everything's across the top of the cells. Bottom, everything's across the bottom. Middle, which is everything's in the middle. And then a baseline, which makes sure they're more in the middle, but their baselines are all put together. So the baselines will be even with each other, but the whole bulk of everything will be in the middle. So you have horizontal alignment with align, and then you have vertical alignment with V-align. You've also got the ability to do cell span and call span. I'm sorry. Row span and call span. Those will allow a cell to span multiple rows or columns as you specify. So they're just going to go out from where they are, and then that's just one less cell that you're going to add in that direction, because that cell is going to take up two. That'd be a good thing to do an example on later on too. So we could create tables, and yes, we will have an example of these tables created later on. A form is also a very useful thing. We will do an example on form here, but on a form, this is something we're going to look at a lot more when we get into website building. Alright, so the form itself defines the existence of a form, and it can have attributes, the method which it's going to send the information, the action, which is where it goes to. There's also encoding type, ENC type, and that's more if you're dealing with file uploads, that applies more so. Input, which is a very universal type of field. There's hidden ones, there's text fields, there's checkboxes, there's buttons, and they will be set by a type attribute. So you have a type that defines what it is, and I have a whole bunch of examples of these that I'm going to show. This can create hidden fields, text fields, checkboxes, buttons, all kinds of stuff you can do with this. and then yeah, your select, and then it will have options within that. And that would be for a list, and then the list items are the options. So you have a select, and then it's going to contain a series of options. And we will have an example on those too. Text area is a multi-line field, and it is going to be defined by rows attribute and calls attribute for its size. Now these guys from the input down, they all have names and they all have values. Values are usually their default values. We'll look more into these when I do my example. Names are the name of that data. The value is what is it going to be. In the case of input, it has a type. We'll look more into this when I do my example. And then we got a few other body tags to take a look into. An image tag, which you can use to put an image or even a video onto your page. Its attributes, you have alt, which is alternate text if the image cannot load. There's also an SRC, which is the source, the path to the image that will be loaded in. And then dyn source, dyn src attribute will be more for video import, more of a dynamic source. A lot of times though, src would work. It would recognize that. And sometimes they'll even use these for audio files, but these are really designed for video. The iframe is an inline frame, so that way you can create a frame within your page and set its source, and you can even name it with the name attribute, but you can set its source with the src to go and grab another page and put it within your page. So if you have like something that you wanted to see right there on your page, you could add the iframe to it. Frame set and frame, those are really used in frame sets, and that we'll deal with more later on. An applet is something we will deal with when we get into fusing Java coding, core Java coding with your pages. You can create applets. And object as well is more for a special object. That's when we get into more heavy coding and its relation to here, but it can be used for putting in all kinds of stuff on here. Oh yeah, an image also, it's going to have a height and a width. A lot of things can be given a height and a width attribute that will determine the dimensions, and the video can be forced to a certain height or width. And iframe is the same way with that. So let's go ahead and get started with the example. Now that we've had a chance to see all of this, so the way I'm going to set up the page, I'm going to go on into my home directory here, and I'm going to look over here at, you could use documents or you could use public if you're on Linux. Later on, once I get into the website building, we might start getting into more of the public directory. That's where I like to put my websites that are on my computer like that. You can put a server right there on your computer and you can link it to something there. Very good for development. We'll talk more about that in a future video. But in this case, I'm going to put this whole project into a homepage folder. And we will just create a new document with the home page. And there we are. We're getting ready to get started. And we're actually going to open this up so that way we don't have to wait for a bunch of stuff. And for my demonstration as well, we will not be using the how do we go in here? We will not be using our doc type to show how it works with quirks mode. So for this page, I won't be using a doc type. So here we have a title. Actually, I am going to delete that momentarily, because I'm also going to show what this thing works without a title as well. I'm also going to open up my browser. In fact, actually, I might just be able to say open it. See, I can open this with the Firefox, with whatever my browser is, by right-clicking on it, since I've created an HTML file. And now I can see this page. You'll see that there is no title up here. That was the title that I just deleted. So let's undo that and save it. Now, when we're working back and forth, one way to save a lot of time, if you're experimenting with stuff, and that's what that sandbox file is. Later on, I'll show that too. But in this case here, I'm going to use Control-S. I'm going to use keyboard shortcuts. Control-S is to save files almost all the time. Now, Alt-Tab works on Linux, works on Windows. I hit the tab, and I can tab across, and I can see all of the stuff that I have open. If I'm holding down on Alt while I'm doing this, and I just press Tab. As soon as I release that Alt, I switch. So if I just hit Alt-Tab, I go back and forth between my last two. But by holding down the Alt and hitting the Tab, I keep this open. So Alt-Tab switches, and then F5 refreshes on my browser. See, I just put my home page back on in there. Now, I'm going to go, and we're going to see what this is like to add a bunch of links to my page. But we're not going to use, see, you'll notice I'm adding a line drop, and I'm going to say one of these is to my bank. Now, if I was actually making these as links, as you will make on your computer, the href is what you're going to put the actual website of wherever you're going to. And then this one here is going to be my social media, let's say. So I'd actually put whatever social media site, wherever I want to link to, on here. And you'll notice that there is a line drop in here, but HTML ignores white space, which means they're not doing a line drop here. There's two ways to get around that. Going back on over here, I'm going to explain as well. You could also put a target in here and make that into a new tab, or you can right-click on these links while you're in here and just say open a new tab, but you can make it to where they open in new tabs as it is, just by putting that, just by putting a target attribute and putting underscore blank. Now I can do the break row. And that will work. Or I can do something that's a little bit more proper, which is to put them inside of a P or a div, and that's something that we will look at on the next sampling of this. In this case, we notice that there's a little bit of spacing. That was the spacing I talked about. The P has that padding in it. So there we are. We got the padding in there. Now, I am going to demonstrate something else. Now this is where we have a section, right? Now I would, if I was going to enclose this in another section, I would be using the H2 for my, like say, my links section. Now under that section, I'm also going to have, your HR, but maybe I'm going to have another one down here that is going to be, my other one down here will be my search section, which will show how to do that. Links and search. And in this case, yeah, sure, we've got links in here. Maybe we got our bank. Maybe we've got our social. Maybe we've got our email. And perhaps we've also got our sandbox, like I had. And you're going to put that link, make sure that's that href in there. And if you want it, there is another tag that I forgot to mention that can go up in your header as well if you want, and that was supposed to be blank. But there is something else that you can do, which is a base for your links. There's also a base tag that you can put up here, and that's where you can put your target or your oh yeah, already had the target in there. Can't double quote like that, but I can single quote. So in this case, now everything on here, unless it's specified otherwise, will now be blanked. The target will be blanked. It will be opened up in a new window. That's what I'm talking about. So I can set this as a target. The base target could be top, base target could be whatever I wanted to on here. I could. Now on this page, I'm not really needing much with the background sound or the meta or any of this. This is just my home page, so I'm skipping all the other tags. Unless I just want some really nice music in there while I'm going to my other stuff. Then I can put the BG sound in there. So here we can see this. So we've got the base target, we got all these links, and we are going to see how this works. You notice the last two down here were the divs, right? They don't have the padding. But this one's padding created the space over here. So bank, social, but these two are crammed together. These two are paragraphs, so they enforce some padding. Now let's say here that you're a really big shop, right? And you want, whoops, actually that is all lowercase on that I put. And the other thing too that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change your settings. You want to copy this and in here you should have your home, and this is where I'm going to say, I can even add it as this one here. Oh no, it's just blank page for there, but here I can add custom URLs, and that is now going to be my custom URL. I would actually rather just call this capitalized. That way it's all uniform. So that'll be in there. Now whenever I go to open my new page, every time I open Firefox, I get to see my handiwork. That means every time I change these things, they're in there. Now, let's create a table. A table on in here. Here we go. because we have more than what we want to deal with on all this, right? We got a whole bunch of different things. Now, this is where I create the table. Let me open this up a little bit more and see what we're looking at. So you see the table tag, you see the caption tag. Inner text for the caption tag is going to be, I can add a caption. That is, it's not required to make the table function, but it will insert text right up over the table. Then we have our two table rows here, and we have, TH, which are table headers. And I did talk about how we want to show how the cell spanning, the column spanning, and the row spanning is going to work. So I'm actually going to create a couple of those on here as well. But first, I'm going to add my links into here. So this would have been a 2x2, but we're actually going to make this into a 2x4. And I'm going to label these guys with my bank, my social, my email, and my play, let's say. And then I would just copy these guys right up and in. Stick these guys right up here. Actually, we should have got the whole div in there. I'll just do the div typed. It'll be shorter that way. And now I will and pretty shortly here we will be. So these are just going to correspond. That's basically what you're doing. You're creating a grid. They're going to correspond with each other. And email, let's say this is personal email and business email, right? Just to give it a reason why we're adding it multiple times. And then we're going to come down here. So banks, full bank, the one that you already have so much money in that you can't do anything else with it. And then, and we can drop lines to make this a little bit easier too. But I did want to keep the grid structure in there. So, and then this is working bank. This is the one you're working on filling up, right? And then your social media stuff as well. Let's just say you just have one of those two, just so that way we can get done. That way we can get on with some other things. And that will mean that I'm going to be done with that. So you can see how that table is. And we're going to add to it again because I said here I wanted to demonstrate the spanning with rows and columns. So I will do a little bit more on here, but we can see now, yes, we have centered text here. We have all of this other text in here too. So yes, we've created that. And I can now demonstrate some of those other attributes that will stick. So let's say I'm going to create I'm actually just going to create one more. It's going to be a little bit complicated. So that way we can really see how this works in its more complex form. I'm actually just going to create 2 more cells. But the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to have a cell that is going to be across all 3, because I'm going to create, remember, I created the row that goes across the top. It's going to be over the top of these top values here, these labels. I'm going to create something in here, but it's only going to go across the first top 4 here. And then down over on the side here, and here we're going to talk about color too, because I'm just going to make some colored bars just to make it easy. And then down over here I'm going to make a whole bar that's going to go from that down. So I have to start with the first cell, which is going to be the one that's going to be right up over here and go down. So this is going to now be, it's going to be a row span of 3, because it is on its row and it has to span down past the labeling row and past the linking row. And a lot of things can do a BG color, which stands for a background color. You can either use a named color or you can use a hex value. And in this case I just need to have something to fill up my space here. You can also use an HTML entity of a space, because it's not going to recognize just white space. But if you actually use an entity, which is what this is, this text right here is the entity for a space. That tells it I meant to put a space there, don't ignore it. So now I'm actually forcing that open. Here I just got that in there. Now on this one I am going to use a call span. I'm spanning across columns, all 4 columns. We had 4 columns in there, right? I'm going to span it across the top of here, and I'm going to put a yellow bar in there. And in this case I'm going to use a hex code, that we can explain that too. It's done by a tricolor system. You have 2 hexadecimal codes for your red, 2 for your green, and 2 for your blue. They're hexadecimal codes, 0 being all the way dark on that element and FF being all the way up. In my case I'm aiming for a yellow, which is going to be, I need my red on and I need my green on, and my blue will not be present to make that happen. And you just get to know that over time, what they are. You can play with different color codes, but it's going to be 6 hexadecimal digits. Your first 2 are your reds, your next 2 are your greens, and your last 2 are your blues. And now let's see what I did there. Okay, actually this one did not detect the gray. Probably, I'm betting I misspelled it. Wait a minute, what did I do? I didn't think that was right. Oh, no, I misspelled over here, BG. See, if you misspell an attribute, then it won't recognize it at all, because that's a custom attribute and it doesn't know what it's doing with it. Now, I could do more on here. I could actually make it enforce that there's a border as well on my table, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add a border. And you can do a lot of that too, also with CSS later on. But in this case, this is not a CSS video, but I just want to show. Now you can create something like that. So that's how you can do a table. And then, yeah, you might link to your sandbox. And you see, if I click on this, it's going to open it up in a new window. And we'll discuss this in a little bit. That's where we discuss forms and all that. But for right now, actually, I think that page might be done, actually, with what we were doing on that. Because we've got our table, we got our... Oh, yeah, no, forms, because we're going to talk about search. So we are going to return to this because one of the things that we are going to do, and actually I put my home page, I should have put sandbox in here. My play page. And now we've got that. So we got a play page, we've got a home page. Now, for the search, we're going to deal with the forms a little bit. So, first we want to understand forms. What are they doing? Let's see, well, let's get that over here, and now there we are, sandbox. Alright, so in our sandbox, our forms are right down over here. And remember, I said we have an action get. Actually, let's just submit that form, so that way we can see and I will copy this in here. That way we can see. So this is what happens on a GET request. You can, this could also be a POST, which means that the information is going to be sent in the request body. That'll be explained more when we deal with server-side scripting and further website building. Now, action on here, you notice over there on my links, I had a lot of hashes on that. But on this case, my link where I'm linking to is a question mark, and that is to make sure it actually refreshes. A hash is more just to move around to an anchor within that page. This is changing the query string, and therefore, that's going to change something with the whole page. So it's going to reload it. So, yeah. Action get. Now let's just take a quick look at what we got. This is the text that we saw. So your type hidden, that means we never saw this. We didn't see anything on our page. Nothing was on our page for hidden. And it says hide me, hide plus me. So that's what's going on here, is we have a bunch of variables being sent as its name equals its value. And it's being URL encoded. So this is to say it's a query string that started, but it's going to be the name equals the value. Ampersand, name equals the value. And it's just going on, so forth. By creating these fields in here, we are determining what is going to be sent. In this case, this is very simple. It's a type hidden, which means it does not show up. The name is what's going to be the name of this value here. And the value is what's going to be sent. Down here on the text, name was text. It did not have a value. This would set the default value displayed as well, but whatever is the end value typed into that is going to be sent. So if the user changes it, it's going to send whatever that new value is. But this is setting the default value. And on the password, so this is a one-line text box for the text. The password is 1. This is text. And this is a password field. It hides what I've entered. But if I did want to set something to default value, I would also type it in that value. But that's not a good practice to put anything sensitive in your source code. And your password field, yes, nothing was entered into it. Well, not at the time that this was created. We entered something later on, but it won't change this because I've already copied it from what it was done. All right. And then we've got the text area. This is the multiple line. See? Now, any of this text that we wanted to set to make this happen, to start out with, would be the inner text. if I wanted to have this text area start with some information in it, I would put it in the inner text. Now let's take a look at the radio buttons, because they're a little bit more interesting. Actually, we had checkbox. Oh, that's right. Checkbox was never sent because it was not checked. Oh, because it did not have a good name. I didn't enter the name for it. So it did not send. Text area, you enter your calls, you enter your rows. That sets the size. But if this was checked and it had a name and it had a value, it would have shown up with the name equals that value when it's checked. And if it's not checked, it's not going to have that value on there. Depending on the browser, depends on what may have been sent. It might have the name, but it's not going to have that value. Radios are kind of like checkboxes, but these are these critters here. So this is your checkbox. It's on or it's not, and I can do any number of checkboxes how I want to, but these radios, only one of its set can be selected. The sets are determined by the names. So if this is checked, then radio 1 would have equaled 1, but it equaled 2 because this was checked. Radio 2 equaled 1 as it was checked, but if I select the other radio, it unselects the last one, and whatever that's selected as, that's what goes. So that's another little feature you can add. This is a drop-down list, and I can also change this to be a list in a box. All I would have to do is change the size to be something other than 1. Now, this stuff has already been kind of entered into here because it saved the state of the form. It's pretty good about doing that with Firefox. But see, now I've got a list, and one of those was selected. That's an attribute that I can add onto here. Now, I was also going to add to this, this one here, the value is shown, and this one here, the value is different, because here I have a value of that option tag, and that changed the value. So if this one was selected, it would have been the value shown here on the select. But this value is the one that was sent. You'll see that was the one that was sent because this one was selected. Value was different from this because this value tag was in there. That's what made it different. So therefore, this value got sent. But it's going to display this and send that. If you don't have that value tag in there, this does the work of both. So this would be the value to be sent. Now we've got a few other little things too. Buttons, resets, and submits. Now buttons are really useful on scripting. That's their main point. As far as for a form to submit to a server, it is not really all that useful. It's useful for linking it up to hook up a script event to it and play with it. But as far as it actually being used to change anything on the form values, that doesn't work. Reset will take all of these things that Firefox was so good at saving the state for and reset it to the defaults. And the submit button will send it where it needs to go. And the submit button, if there is a value, if there's a name entered for that, that name along with this value will also be added to that request. So submit, and there was no value because I had no value here. Now on these guys, on the buttons, this is what will show as the text displayed. So you see, text got displayed. That's also the text that's displayed, and there is not really a way to change that I can think of how to change the value that's sent versus the value that's displayed. A lot of times too, a title attribute can be added to a number of different elements as well, and that can add tooltip text. Let me demonstrate that real quick to my button up here. What that does, now I have tooltip text that I can add through that, and it can be done with many other things. Many other elements can also take that title on there, especially inputs, but many other things throughout there, like links, I think can also do that a lot. Links can be done. Alright, and that's the home page again. So, this is a deep dive into the HTML. Now we're going to look at one other little thing, because remember we created that search box down there for my home page. So I'm going to do one other thing before I close this out, and I'm going to show you how to put a search box on your home page, custom to what you like to do. We're going to get back on over here because we're done with the play page, but we are going to, I don't have the internet connection, so I can't really show you this should do a Google. Oh wait, this should make sure. Okay, good. So I'm going to run a test query on here, and it can't find the site, but I can still see up here where we can see where our text was that we looked for, and it's the Q variable. The fact that we have the question mark means it's using get. That's what we need to know. So I am going to get. Now the action, I'm going to want to replace this with the Google URL. It's going to automatically put in that question mark. I don't really need that unless I'm linking to my same page. So that's going to go to Google search. I don't really need to add anything else on here. If I wanted to add a client or something like that to it, I could. My text value is going to be important. That variable name needs to be, the type is going to change how it displays, but that variable name, that's what we did the search for, so I needed to know I'm calling it Q. See that Q in there? I'm calling this Q whatever I'm going to send. And I don't need a default value on this. And that is simply going to be all I need on here, and I don't need a value on, I don't need a name on this. The value is going to be displayed. So now you're going to see there's a little issue with my home page on this. Doesn't really tell me what I'm searching with, but I can, and you'll see the query, this would have been a good search. This would have actually triggered the search engine if I'd been online. But in my case here, if I want to label this, I just need to put some text next to it. It's pretty easy to do that. I can just go ahead and say I want to put this in a paragraph, make that bold, say Google. That way we know it's a Google search, what we're doing. putting that whole thing in the same paragraph. That way it's all in one line. That way it should look decent. And now I've got Google search. That way if I put in a whole bunch more search engines on here, and let's say I also want to add, let's say add YouTube or something like that. Actually, I don't see it on there, but I'm just going to have to, whatever else I wanted to add, I could go through here, I could find it, I could stick it in here. And we'll just pretend that I changed that to the YouTube URL in the same pattern, because it would take me a little while to get that up and going. But to just say that's YouTube search, and then I can label that differently down here. And now you'll see there are now two search boxes, both labeled. We just don't know for sure if the YouTube one has the right request URL. But this is basically how you can create a page and be able to make it exactly what you like. I think I've covered most of the main points of working with HTML in this, so thank you for watching.